Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for coming. And today's panel's discussion is called Workplace Culture and Mobility in Time of Change. My name is Valentina Dončević from Design Studio of Alternative. And on behalf of Paperspace Asia, I'm thrilled to be your host today. Today's session the panel discussion will take approximately 40 minutes, after which we will go into Q&A session. And we're more than welcome to stay here until 5:30 or so we can take our time with questions. And we have online audience also. And we're very happy that everybody who's joining in online, so please welcome. This is a second of series of 4 panel discussions we're conducting alongside the exhibition we're holding here at National Design Center. Both panel discussions as well as the exhibition are created by Paperspace Asia and with support of DesignSingapore Council. This is also part of the National Design Center's Casting Hope program for April and May this year. And our virtual audience today, you're very welcome, and please ask any questions you might have during the entire discussion online through to the module online. And our live audiences, we will pass the microphone during the session, so please feel free to ask any questions you might have. We might extend our session, but not to worry, we can stay here, and afterwards we will be having some nice refreshments outside. Now, without further ado, I will just give you a very, very brief housekeeping matters. We have 2 exits here, one here and one at the back. And also, please keep your masks on throughout the discussion, as well as keep your 1 meter distancing. We just have to, I'm sorry about that. But I won't go any further, and I'd love to introduce you, our panelists today. So we are very, very pleased to have Andy Schmidt, the CEO of 6i Communication Private Limited. In bringing the Swiss-made employee application Beekeeper to Singapore, Andy helps organizations boost employee engagement levels of their frontline workforces. He was previously in multiple financial roles within the MNC Siemens for 23 years. Next, we have Sherwin, Siregar, Senior Vice President and Head of People Experience at Prudential. He's responsible for driving an inclusive work culture at Prudential, enabling employees to reach their full potential. His mandate includes culture, diversity and inclusion, people experience, workplace transformation, digital HR, and HR service excellence. Sherwin formerly headed distribution business management at Prudential. Our third panelist is Marc Shamma'a, Joint Lead Workplace Strategy, Consulting APAC region at JLL. Marc has over 25 years of experience in integrated consulting across the property life cycles, including portfolio strategy, workplace strategy, change management, location advisory, FM procurement, process and organizational design. This has included work across industries worldwide, such as financial services, pharma, telecommunications, and technology, FMCG, and the public sector. And today's will be moderated by Angelina, a workplace change and communications consultant at Paperspace Asia. Led by her passion for people-centric initiatives, Angelina's communication skills have been honed through her past roles in international communications at SMRT, digital marketing with the CPF board, and as a journalist with Singapore Press Holdings. Now, Angelina, take it away. I'll leave it to you. Please help me welcome all our panelists and put our hands together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Valentina, for that lovely introduction. Firstly, I must say thank you so much for attending this in person. You have no idea how excited we are to have a session like this. It's been quite a while since we've been in something like this. It is quite a privilege to be on the stage, sharing the stage with Andy, Marc, and Sherwin. They are, as you can tell by Valentina's introduction, they are really quite well versed in what they do. The pandemic has forced organizations to make really large-scale changes and embrace ways of working that were previously not quite embraced, not heard of perhaps, and perhaps even shunned. So in today's session, what we intend to do is turn the spotlight onto people, the very core of an organization. Most of us here in the room have the responsibility to ensure employees continue to have an enriching, enabling, and an empowering experience with their organizations throughout any types of change and crises even. And as Winston Churchill once said, you never want to waste a crisis. So let's explore how we can leverage the pandemic to reset or shape the things that matter. Additionally, I'd like to highlight that in this talk, we are looking at defining mobility in two manners. Firstly, as the physical decentralization of the workplace. And secondly, as what it means to empower employees to work optimally from anywhere at any time they choose to. Now, let me turn it over to the experts. First, let's start off this discussion by talking a little bit about culture at the workplace. So this is for you, Marc. In your experience in effective change within organizations, tell us a little bit about how you would define a time of change and what conditions cause change.
Well, I think that's, at this time, it's a very easy one to answer with a pandemic taking place. But change comes from many different varieties, from many different sources. And currently, I think the pandemic is changing everything, whereas change can be incremental, bit by bit. I think what we're seeing right now is we're in the middle of a transformation. Where we were 6-12 months ago, where we will be in 6 to 12 months, will be unrecognizable. Many of us think we know where it's going, but I think when we're in 12 months from now, looking back where we were 12 months ago, it will be a very different world. So it's an external force, a pandemic, but it can also come from internal changes, bit by bit, a change of CEO, a change of technology, stuff like that can instigate change. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so on external forces, Sherwin, I just want to ask you, how do you think the pandemic has shaped your corporate culture or shifted it even?
I think it's shifted some of the manifestation of it, right? But I think if we think about our own corporate culture, we've always prided ourselves on flexibility, empowerment, innovation, curiosity, collaboration, and a lot of that, right? And we took maybe like 3 years ago, we started on this journey to move from what would be a traditional FI, fixed desk and things like that, to be able to, okay, we need to break down barriers. We need to have people collaborate more. So we moved from a physical space to our offices in M1, Marina 1, which was much more, nobody has an office, even our C-suite, even our CEO, everybody's open plan, we have collaboration areas and things, right? But that whole mindset of being able to work flexibly and operate that way allowed us to actually respond to the pandemic quite quickly, right? Because we actually had the policies in place, we had practices, we have the principles in place. We just need to turn on a few more buttons, like maybe VPN licenses, for example, to be able to enable it. So we were able to pivot quite quickly. And if you look at what's happening in industry, when after the circuit breaker and expansion of phases, for us within the local market, we kept on with our default from home much longer than many of our players in the industry, right? So as long as they could come back, let's bring as many people back as possible. There was some response. Ours was, no, we learn how to adapt, we learn how to be productive, let's leverage that and see how that takes us in the future versus going back, right? So I think to answer your question about culture, the representation of the culture and how we behave now in an online space, virtual collaboration, we started a journey before, and then that helped us now in a virtual setting.
Before we move to Andy, Marc, I just want to check with you. Does this resonate with the rest of maybe some of your clients that you worked with as well?
I think what I'm finding, I was taking a note down as Sherwin was speaking there, and I was thinking more about how my experience of our culture has changed over the last 6 to 12 months. And I think 12 months ago, I was much more focused on the local culture. And to some extent, that hasn't changed. But what has changed is my exposure and my integration with our regional and even global culture as an organization. And I'm much more aware, and I'm much more in contact with them, and I feel much closer to them. Whereas with the local culture, I'm feeling, I wouldn't say more distant. It's just a changed relationship with the local culture because I know how tall they are and I know what they look like in real life. But that global culture, I've met very few of them from the global culture, but I feel I know them quite well because we're interacting so much more than we did before.
So this idea of distance really has reduced quite greatly.
Very much so. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay. Andy, you're a strong advocate for meaningful, timely, and thorough employee engagement as part of strengthening workplace culture. So I'd like to ask you, whose responsibility is it to engage employees in the process of strengthening workplace culture?
Oh, wow. Yeah. So I believe starting from the culture point of view, I think culture is just one component in order to get to a high employee experience over there. So I think there are other components which have to fit in together. And that's, for example, the technology that we are providing our people out there. And then it's about the physical space, and the physical space can mean a lot. I mean, it can be an office space, but nowadays it can be also then the home office. It could be also remote office places, work from anywhere and so on. So what is important with the part of employee engagement is there is actually an input which is provided by the organization, and we call it commonly employee experience. So the employee experience is being provided by the organization, and as a return, we are getting engaged employees, right? So that implies already that employee engagement takes two parties. So it's the employer, but it also takes the employee. So it always takes two parties to dance. And the challenge that we often see is, especially here in the Singapore environment, that a lot of employees are leaning back and say, please engage me. I'm disengaged at work. Can you do something about it? But I always encourage people to say, come on, you're an adult human being at work. If you're disengaged, why don't you do the first step and ask your employer for a dance, for example, and you come up with some kind of moonshot ideas in order to increase your own engagement. So it's really a give and take where it takes everybody to work together. Of course, leadership brings the broad direction over there, but the detailed work, the employees have the similar responsibility like the employer.
How do you feel about this, Sherwin? I think you had a reaction when I first read out the question.
Yeah, so I think two angles, right? So one of the things that we say internally is that with culture, there needs to be a tone from the top, right? So this is the way we're going to be. We're going to be collaborative. We're going to trust you. We're going to focus on your output. That, you know, that's a tone. But then there needs to be an echo from the bottom, right? So that it's not just falling on dry ground. Like, yeah, I see that. So I love the construct that you shared and around the partnership, right? There's two parts. So there's a tone from the top, and then yes, okay, that's great, and I'm going to behave. Sorry.
Technology,
my watch is being a critic. But you're right. So, and it's around them being able to then behave in this way, right? To be able to do it as an echo. And if you don't echo with what the tone is, and then maybe that's not the right culture for you in a way, right? So that, and that's kind of like what you both see, right? And there might be a different culture in somewhere else where it's more suited for you. So I think that's one angle. The second angle is that I love the concept of like personal responsibility over your own engagement, right? So I love the idea of that you have an experience of work, and that then gives the output of your engagement level, right? It's an experience that derives the engagement. And I do believe that it's like, it's in this world where the needs are so changing, we are being so much more, if you're able to highlight your need and have an idea of how it can be better engaged with, then that's where the organization can also like, oh, that's what you mean. Okay, let's try to see how we can fit it to. So I love that. So that resonates.
Okay. Marc, coming back to the idea of mobility, would you agree that mobility and agility thrive in a company that is based on trust?
I think it's essential to have trust for mobility and agility to function, and they're kind of different aspects of the same thing. I think and it's a reciprocal arrangement between a manager and his or her staff. If a manager trusts their staff to do their work regardless of where they are, whether they're in an eye shot or anywhere in the world, then that staff should feel empowered to do so. But the reciprocal side is that the staff needs to earn that trust, needs to show that they're actually worth that trust and they've earned it, and therefore they can, that mutual trust has to work both ways. And if there's a breach of trust, then it can collapse. So absolutely, trust is essential for that process.
So maybe perhaps in your personal experience, especially because you feel that your reach has expanded beyond just a local team, perhaps you can tell us how you've nurtured that trust in your employees.
I think it's essential to, as a manager of people, or I'd say a co-worker with people, even if you're a manager, keep that hierarchy as flat as possible, and reach out to your colleagues as often as you can, comfortably do so, and be available for them to reach out to you. So if someone has a quick message on a messaging app, be responsive to it, and that means that they know that they can get a quick answer. I think that's becoming so much more important in this kind of distributed world where we live. When people can't see somebody and go, I've seen them, I need to ask them a question. They've got to be in mind on the apps and quickly accessible that way.
Yes, I think maybe then, Andy, can I ask, how do you reckon, what kind of technology or what kind of platforms perhaps are in place now that can get you to bridge that gap and to provide timely interaction?
So in general, I mean, life is all about relationships and work is not an exception, right? And can you imagine to build up a relationship without communicating with each other? It's not possible, right? So communication is key. And then, of course, if now everybody is geographically dispersed, the communication cannot happen face-to-face anymore. So we have to substitute this with something else. So now technology can be the bridge in order to close those gaps. And what is then very, very important, that we have a communication platform where everybody feels included, so that not someone feels excluded just because they might not have a corporate email account, which a lot of frontliners actually don't. They're never given a corporate email account, but they all have a smartphone. So now our smartphone, we have our common denominator where we can now get everyone on the same platform. So now you just need to have a proper corporate platform where you can administer this properly. And then you have an opportunity as a leader to finally really communicate openly in a two-way format with all of your people in an instant at the same time. So you don't have this telephone game where the leadership talks to the managers and the managers talks to the supervisor talks to the frontline staff. And then as a leader, you don't really know what the frontline staff heard because it went through certain channels over there. So technology opens up a huge opportunity over there to build a trust-based communication in the organization. And then it's about having a proper cadence, so that you set the right expectation and what kind of intervals can I expect to hear from the top leadership. And I think that's all important as well, because if you start to communicate every day, suddenly there's a week break, then the people say, what's wrong? Something happening up there. Yeah? So I think you have to manage expectations as well, and what kind of frequency the senior leadership is, for example, using a certain platform.
But I think if I can jump in there, I think the challenge with a lot of the technology is people are booking time to sort of like get that meeting together, and someone says, can I have a quick chat with you? And you say, yeah, check my calendar, and the next gap is in 7 days time. Yeah. That connection keeps evaporating. And so somehow we as people, managers, staff, whatever, need to find a way to be connecting with each other more in a more casual way, as though we might have done had we bumped into each other in the office. And that, I think, is something that some of us are learning it. I think I'm learning how to do it. Some of us are still trying to figure it out, and others are way behind the curve.
I think maybe Sherwin, I would like to ask, how do you, because you're a very busy man, you have back-to-back meetings, you take calls in cars, and you take calls whenever you can. I just want to know, how would you make time for your employees should they need to speak to you?
Yeah, so I think the reality is that the calendar is yours and you have to control it, right? So what Marc says resonates, to be able to provide blocks in your schedule that you're able to take, that you may be able to unlock for stuff that comes up, right? You build slack into the system, so to speak. But I also take it sounds formal, but it depends how it's executed, right? So I do have weekly catch-ups with all my direct reports. I have a monthly catch-up with the ones that are below that. We do have a team engagement, team stuff, and those might sound very formal because it's scheduled, but in its execution, you can make it casual or informal, right? So every meeting that we have emotional check-in. right? So to check in to have people hear how you're experiencing today, what are you feeling, anything that's distracting you, what you need to be. So like you are actually checking in onto the plane, you're fully here, right? We give build-in time for the human connection. And actually it's a lot of what we talked about, I think both of us talked about leadership by example, setting the tone. So I'm very authentic with my own, let's say, personal life. We say personal life, but the reality is that I think that we have one life with many aspects, right? And sometimes at work, we tend to only show the work aspect, right? But I think if we say that actually it's okay to talk about stresses that you have today, and you might not be the best position today because you're a bit frenzied, because my kids had a meltdown this morning, and I get it, and 10 minutes, and it's very real, and people experience it, right? And you have the people at home, and suddenly your kid pops out on screen, or something happens, the dog comes, sorry, I have to pause my grab, that's all bunch of interruptions, but it's also very human. And if you present yourself as being that human, I think it sets the tone and provides kind of like the tone for psychological safety for people to be themselves. And it comes with for me, it comes with a belief that if people are allowed to be their authentic selves, that's where you get diversity of thought, that's where you get diversity of thinking, and that's where you get innovation, more empathy, and you have better outcomes, right? So it's all connected. It's not just a feel-good factor. Yeah. So I think that's for me on a personal front.
I would like to add on to this one. I think nowadays we have to be very, very proactive on managing our communication, because who is not feeling somehow burned out from back-to-back Zoom meetings all the time, and then maybe 5 minutes out of the 45 minutes were really relevant over there. Yeah. So what some of our clients are doing is that they're actually having meetings where the people can participate. It's not compulsory. And then someone is a big organization. So someone takes in the effort to condense this kind of meeting into 5 minutes. And then they're uploading a video on the platform over there. So it becomes asynchronous communication. So people can watch this at their own time. So you give back autonomy to the people and say, okay, you control what kind of information you take in. It's all available for you over here. Those are the condensed meeting minutes. And you can then take it in a format that is nice to digest and easy to digest over there. But especially what you referred to, this human-to-human connections have to be real-time. Yeah. Because they happen so often in the office with this water cooler talks where you bump into people by accident, and it's not happening anymore now in the virtual world. So sometimes we have to recreate this kind of forums where people can just happen to meet each other by accident and talk about anything under the sun, right? Yeah. So there's literally no agenda over there, and then you just see how the dynamic in that group develops. Because what I am worried about is that over time, with this kind of remote work, we are losing innovations. Because I don't get ideas when I'm staring at the computer screen by myself. I get ideas when I talk to people from different domains, from different departments, around the pantry or the coffee talk and so on. And this is not happening, then I do fear that we are losing innovative speed in organizations.
Okay, let's shift gears a little bit and speak a little bit more about hybrid work and flexibility. So Sherwin, this one is for you actually, especially because I think Prudential has always been all about flexibility. So a question here would be, why does flexibility matter to employees? Why should organizations provide the support to help with this?
Yeah, so if you're asking why, what would help the corporate thinking that this is needed, right? Maybe I'll share our own thinking. So if we think about hybrid work, and it's how do we flexibly meet the needs better, right? And when we say needs, maybe there's 3 broad categories, right? So there's the business needs, like things need to happen, deliveries need to do, and stuff like that. And in what is the manner of work or modality of work that needs to accomplish that goal, right? So if you're standalone, if you're just doing focus work, frankly, you could do that from anywhere. Right? But sometimes there's a collaboration piece, there's value in coming into the room, drawing on a board and things. So there's that to be done in person. So that's why it's a hybrid, right? Some things happen in the office, something happens remotely. But if you look at also, what I think is quite important is that we look at customers' needs, right? So if you think about it, things are changing a lot, but the need for us to serve our customers' needs hasn't changed. What has changed is the customers' needs are rapidly evolving, right? And now then the question is, how do we be more flexibly able to meet your customers' needs, right? From a different timings, from things. I mean, even if you look at call centers, it used to be a certain time. How can now people are really used to having a 11, 12. In the old day, I'm from insurance, right? Like how many, and when it used to be insurance program, how many of you will be able to see your agent in your home at 11 p.m. at night, right? Very rare. But during the pandemic, having a Zoom call is common, right? So suddenly that change actually, sometimes for the clients, that's the only time they have after their back-to-back calls. But it's an important thing. They want to cover their children. That's the only slot. And you have to be able to make it available, right? So that whole move from in-person to virtual, right? So that's a flexible. Yeah. And sorry.
I was going to say, I mean, it's just the whole assumptions that we're making nowadays about where a meeting takes place, it has changed radically. I'm going to refer to my wife, who had an appointment with a doctor, and she turned up at the doctor. It was for a kind of a consultation, and the doctor wasn't there. And they'd assumed that it was going to be a virtual appointment. And she was like, no, I'm paying enough money for this appointment. I want it to be in person. And then by contrast, today I was on a meeting with my colleagues in China, in Shanghai, and they all assumed it was in person. And it's like, where's the dial-in? I can't dial in. It's like, oh, okay. Oh, right. Yeah, we'll set one up. So assumptions are changing radically as to where meetings take place and how hybrid working happens. So I think hybrid working is not about the individual doing hybrid working. I think it's about the collective, the group, the team doing hybrid working, whether it's your customers and your vendors, whether it's your team. You're not one person working hybrid. Doesn't matter. It's how do you interact with your colleagues and where are they?
I love what Marc's saying, because I thought about three, right? So business needs, customers needs, and of course, the premise of the question was employee needs, right? And I think the reality is that different people have different needs, right? So that we do have to recognize that there are some people whose home environment is not conducive for work, right? So and you have to provide an office space for them, right? And some people's the home environment actually requires them to be more at home than at work, than in the office, right? And there's a flexibility there. And I have to say, I love. Which home? Their home. Sorry. The other thing is I think the mental wellness, right? The psychological wellness and being upfront, right? Even like what Marc is saying, like, I don't know what's going on. What should I be doing? This need to be able to schedule stuff is an additional mental load on people, actually, right? And if we look at mental wellness, and he said that we lose the innovation, right? The conversation that spark innovation when we don't see people in person. But the other thing is also the social connection and the mental wellness and the psychological wellness that comes from that social connection, right? I remember when it first came out, I have colleagues who actually they really miss, like, your friends at work were people that you might unload or vent or stuff with your problems at home. Right, but then when you don't go to home, you only have the problems at home. So that friends at work element and actually experiencing that friendship as a real relationship is actually really key.
Yeah.
So our position within Prudential is that actually you should spend 2 days of the week. The recommendation is 2 days of the week with your teams in person. But we give a framework, we give a thing, and we don't have all the answers. So we're saying that this is it. We came up with a playbook, and we said, okay, everybody, please use this framework to have the conversations in your team to decide what's good for your team, right? And as what Marc said, we don't know, right? So after all, let's tweak, let's have conversations, let's be able to see, and then we form and the policy has to be that level of principle to allow that flexibility as we tweak along. Right. So
I think it's an important part, because otherwise you lose social capital.
Yeah.
If you don't prepare this, it doesn't happen by itself. It has to be a little bit instigated by the organization over there. But if I may, I would like to take another perspective on this one, because we talk a lot about hybrid work from anywhere and so on. And we have to be more conscious and aware that we're actually talking about the minority of the global workforce who even has the privilege of working from anywhere, because the vast majority of the global workforce, 60 to 80%, they can only dream of this privilege of working from home, because they're in logistics, they're in hospitality, they're in healthcare, they're in manufacturing and so on. They have to be where their work is. And we must not forget about them when we talk about the future of work, and then only talk about the office workers, but we are not improving the work-life harmony of our frontliners out there, our essential workers, or I like to call them the high social value workers, which luckily enough now with all this pandemic, we appreciate them more than we did in the past. And we have to keep up this momentum and really do something about their employee experience as well.
Okay. That's very insightful. We must not forget those people as well, the high value people.
High social value.
High social value, excuse me. Okay, let's move on to managing change. Marc, again,
Why are you taking on me?
He's the expert. He's the expert at this, though.
could you perhaps share with us the biggest reasons that fuel and drive positive change in an organization?
Sorry, the biggest reason?
The biggest reasons and the biggest contributors that can drive positive change in an organization.
Wow, I wasn't prepared for that one. Can I pass it?
I like to ask some questions that you were not prepared for.
Well, the biggest reasons to drive positive change are in order to realize change. If you don't drive positive change, you're not going to get change happening. You're going to get resistance. People are going to go, whoa, 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 why is this? You know, if people are up in arms against it, they're not going to embrace the change at all. And so you have to drive positive change. Now, how to do that, I think has to be through engagement. You have to bring the people on the journey. You can't assume that they're going to be in favor of it. Neither can you assume they're going to be against it. You can assume that they don't know what's going on and they need to be informed. So you need to bring them on a journey of understanding, why is this change happening? How is it going to affect you personally, individually? How is it going to affect your team? And why is it good for the organization? So understand what's going on, and that gradually will get acceptance. And once they've got acceptance, you're kind of halfway there to the buy-in piece. If they're accepting that the change has to happen, whether they like it or not, they may still not buy into it, but you have to go through a process of that kind of education. I hate that word, actually. It's kind of engagement, communication, touchy-feely, whatever. It's all of that stuff if you want to make a successful change happen.
Okay, what about this idea of ownership? We would like to try and propagate some sort of ownership throughout the company when it comes to change or any sort of change that you want to see within the company, right? How do you think you would nurture this idea of ownership?
So what I like to, when I think about this, I think you've got the leadership of an organization are planning a change because it's the right thing for the organization to do. One has to assume that that's a given. The right thing for the organization at the top may not necessarily be the right thing for the organization at the bottom. And sometimes the guys at the coalface, in the trenches, on the front line, see things that the guys at the top level don't see. Yes. And they want to wave a flag and go, guys, this is going to kill our business. Pay attention. And maybe they're right. Maybe they're seeing something that the leadership have not seen. So creating a feedback loop is extremely important. The leadership at the same time have to recognize that there's a feedback loop, that the people at the front line are qualified, decent, professional people who take their job seriously, not ignoramuses who are just trying to make noise and be resistant. Yeah. And so they have to listen. So as a change agent, a change manager, you need to build that communications loop. And that will breed engagement, and that will give the people on the front line a chance to be heard. It may well be that the leadership say, yeah, we've actually thought of that one, and there's a big picture here which you don't appreciate. So thank you for the feedback, but we're still going to do it this way. Then at least the people who are kind of flagging things up feel like they're heard and that they're being taken seriously, not disregarded. That's an extremely important point. What we don't want the leadership to do is to go, yeah, thanks, ignore them. We've kind of, yeah, we heard you, carry on, because that will disengage people. Yeah. They'll lose ownership.
Okay. Sherwin, a question for you. In effecting change, you would need the help from not just your top leaders, you would also need your middle management as well. And I'm sure you have had ways to equip them with the skills needed to drive forward change.
Sure.
So if you care to share some ways that has been done in Prudential.
Okay, so I think in corporate language we use drive change, right? You drive change. But maybe a premise, this is maybe more personal, right? So the premise that I think we influence rather than drive or cause, right? Because it's about people and how do we influence people. And the specific framework I personally like and I use around that is the influence model, which means that for the premise is for anybody to be able to say, okay, I choose to change my mindset and my behavior. That's what you're after, right? But to be able for them to say that, they have to say four things first, right? I know why I have to change. I know what's being asked of me and I know why, right? I can see other people behaving in this new way and having this. I have the skills to behave in this new way, and barriers are being removed or I'm being rewarded to move in this new way, right? And if you list that from an activity perspective, you have to be able to like foster understanding. You have to kill role models. There's a skills capability, and you have reinforcement mechanisms. If you think about these 4 questions and you look at us as individuals, the change processes that we have gone through, quite often the company is pretty good at 1 or 2, right? I'm pretty good at telling the story. This is why, right? Almost everybody gets that, right? But are you really great at promoting the role models that's not just at the leadership level, but at their managers and at their peers? Because some people might be early adopters and are more moving, right? So like, hey, look, this is what is happening and this is great. Sometimes it's like, oh, wow, that's a great idea, but what do I do now? I don't know how to do that. Like, he's so great, but I don't know how to do that. So that whole skills piece, right, of being able to, like, I want you to work remotely. That means there's these teams, right, and stuff. And the enablement is really key. Because the reinforcement mechanisms is that both that it's so difficult to remove in this way, but Sherwin, you're saying this, but the systems are so painful, right? I see a lot of laughter in the room actually, right? So that resonates, right? So that how do we remove those specific barriers and how do we reward them, right? So for us in our culture piece and our values, we want to bring our values to life. We are translating to actual behaviors that we want the whole organization to behave in a certain way, right? So we have a from to shift. We educate them, we be able to do that, and then to be able to then say, everybody please behave in this particular way, and this great person is being this way. Hey, your friend is behaving this way. You have the skills, and actually we're going to measure that this is happening, and we're going to be rewarded as a team around it, right? So that's sort of like that, and that 4 questions needs to be answered in the context of every level of the organization. And your managers, to the original question of like, the managers need to be able to then help their staff or their team answer those as well. This is what's, to Marc's point of what's in it for you, right? This is why you need to change, but this is how you can do it, and let's all move together.
Okay, taking the perspective of employees, Andy, how do you think employees can be empowered to participate in change? And how can they be ensured that they're being heard?
Oh.
So I like this 4 questions that Sherwin was sharing there, because it shows respect. And I think lack of respect is a big obstacle to change, but giving the people respect, inviting everyone to become part of the change. I mean, we have this human inertia for change, right? Why? Because we know the status quo, there's certain certainty. But when there's a change, there's uncertainty, and as humans, we don't really like uncertainty over there. But we also don't like to be changed. But a lot of us don't mind to become part of the change if we get invited to become part of the change. And I echo what Marc also shared over there. I think we have to respect our frontliners who are serving our customers, that they often might know better what the customers like or don't like, compared to the guys sitting there in the ivory tower who haven't seen a customer for donkey years. Yeah? So we have to invite our experts, our frontliners, our loyal, long-serving employees into the change process by giving them an opportunity, a platform where they can voice their opinions. And some of our clients have used it very intelligently. For example, then they have an innovation drive months where everybody can share some innovative ideas from the front lines. And then the whole peers, the whole community is voting on those ideas. And then the leadership is just observing what's happened there. So you have your swarm intelligence working. And then after the 1 month, you see which ideas got the most upvotes from the peers. And that might be the ones which work best, because the whole swarm intelligence decided this over there. And then when the leadership picks up these ideas and it's visible in this social platform over there, you win a lot of respect with your people, because you don't say, I'm the clever guy up there, I know what works and what doesn't work. No, I invite the people and let the democracy inside decide over there what we should go forward to. Yes. So that's an opportunity which some companies are embracing.
Okay. So this idea on what you mentioned a little bit about ideas, new ideas that are coming out. Sherwin, for you again, in implementing change and testing new ideas, what's the sweet spot in implementing it or waiting for data to confirm that this is one way to go?
Oh, wow.
Because I asked this because I know Prudential was very quick to implement ideas.
Yes.
I want to understand unlike unlike other companies that wait for some sort of clear indication that this will work before they implement it, you're ready to go ahead.
Okay, so I think firstly, the sweet spot is quite situational. Depending on the situation, depending on stuff, the sweet spot might shift, right? But maybe since we were talking about hybrid working, I'll use that example, right? So there was a lot of debate internally when, okay, we can come back to the office, should it be 2 days, should it be 3 days, should we mandate, should we be 3 days? And there's a variety of conversations around that. And then and my usual note is to be able to engage and ask the business what do they need and stuff like that. But the reality is nobody really knows because it's new. Right, so I realized after a number of discussions, there's a whole bunch of hypotheses which may or may not be true. Right, so in there we said, okay, the approach we're taking is that let's anchor people in some level of understanding, a common language. So this is the reasons, pros and cons of working from home, things and all this is that's enable. So there's a playbook, right? So that people are educated on the things. But then let's try. We have a hypothesis: 2 days in the office. Or 2 days face-to-face rather, maybe not in the office. And then let's try and we listen and we pivot and stuff. If I waited for data for everybody else, the reality is you go online and you can hear leading lights of the industry on both ends, right? But what is unique for us, we have to actually experience it, have an hypothesis test, right? We have this hypothesis, let's try, and then we can be able to do that. So that would be a specific example of the hybrid work approach, right? But you have a variety of thought. There are some people that you have to have a very tight frame. Okay, the principle is that we give autonomy and empowerment within a frame. Okay. The discussion is how tight should that frame be, right? And the reality is you have to try and find out. And the danger is when somebody goes like, I know this will work. And I'm like, okay, you have a hypothesis.
Interestingly enough, and I know, Angelina, you've got a bit of a bugbear about design thinking, but what you've just described is exactly design thinking. It's an iterative process. We've got a hypothesis, let's prototype it, let's roll it out, and let's use that as a tool for change and see if that works and iterate from that. So I just sidestep there because I know it's been floating around in the background.
That is what we want to get to, yes. Totally caught on there. Okay, looks like we're almost out of time for the panel discussion. I think I just have maybe one question for all three of you. What are the 3 most important factors to you in reframing a crisis to opportunities for change?
Wow.
Is that a really big question?
Yeah, let Andreas start.
Okay.
Sorry. And that wasn't, you don't have to jump into that.
So you were asking what are the 3 factors to convert a crisis into an opportunity?
Yes. How would you best do that too?
Yeah, I believe change is not painful. Resistance to change is painful. So we all have to embrace it. And I think if you look back, we have been changing all the time. And we can just take a crisis like this one as a nice catalyst in order to create some changes, which in the past, maybe we had ideas, but it didn't really happen. Like what we have seen with some of our clients, they were sitting on the fence for the longest time regarding digital transformation. But now with this crisis, suddenly they can't run away from it anymore. They have to make work possible, and suddenly they jump on this digital train and they realize it's not so difficult after all. You take one step, even a small step is a step forward, and then you can embrace this.
Little baby steps to embrace it. Okay.
Even baby steps are progress.
Sherwin?
I think it's the lens of, the needs of customers, employees, and the organizational setup, right? So why I say this? I think that when it comes to crisis, we must really be very clear to recognize what is changing, but what also stays the same, right? So I give you an example from HR function, right? So everybody says everything is changing, but actually what stays the same is that we create value for our customers, our distributors, our investors, and employees. That has not changed, right? What has changed is the needs of those people has changed. And how to respond to that better, how do we be able to that? And when you have the needs mindset, that always brings to, with what you're saying, right, the opportunities to better meet the needs of all these sectors better than another organization, right? And then that's where the opportunity comes. So that's sort of my interpretation.
Yeah, and apologies, by the way. I was like, wow, what a question. I think the way to approach any crisis to say, okay, what's the worst that could happen? And let's break it down into each category. What's the worst that can happen? And how can we turn that into a win? What would it be? So if everybody has to work from home, is it really that bad? Is there any positive? Is there a silver lining in that one? Or if there are going to be health and well-being challenges that are going to crop up because people are stuck indoors for months on end, what can we do to turn that into a delight? Find the delight in that somewhere, and how can we kind of turn it on its head? So I think bit by bit you do that. And what you could, I mean, what we are doing a lot is checking with the people and saying, well, what's it like for you? Tell me what's bad, and tell me what would make it not so bad for you. Tell me what would make it great for you. And again, back to listening to your people, listening to your customers, listening to what's going on in their heads, and saying, well, what can we do to help? And sometimes just that active listening can really help people open up, because the worst piece is if they've got no way to open up, and they've got that, they're bottling up the issues inside and saying, who do I turn to? It's like, you don't need to turn to anybody. We're here. We're opening the door for you.
Okay. Thank you very much for your time. Now we shall turn, I'll hand it over to Valentina to take us through the Q&A portion. I hope all of you have many, many questions ready. I can see everybody so enthusiastic.
Everyone who's online, please feel free to use the Q&A module on your webinar. But as for us here, anybody has any questions, please raise your hand and we will pass you the microphone.
Okay, maybe we can start with one of the online questions. The first is to Sherwin, actually.
Yeah.
Since embracing new workflows and arrangements, has there also been a shift in how your organization measures the success and performance of its people? What are some of these changes in approach?
That's a great question, right? And from the influencing model that I talked about, the fourth one is removing barriers and rewarding for new positions, right? So I think our advantage was because we started this journey a few years earlier. So for example, already our performance matrix or metrics encompasses a very big component on the how we are doing things, right? And how we are bringing the value. And when we say how we are doing things, is how we are bringing the values to life, right? How are we being ambitious? How are we being curious? Are you creating your own learning journey? Are we being nimble? Are we testing new ideas? Are we being empathetic to our people, right? So that level of things is actually something that we are creating, we are purporting, we are perpetuating, we are saying, propagating, if you will. And it's then being measured through a feedback channel, through things to be able to tell, and we're building a feedback culture as well. And the mechanism then rolls up into actually your performance appraisal at the end of the year, right? So it's really important. And it's 360, it's from all over the place. And that's quite key. We started the journey a little bit before the pandemic, and this pandemic reinforces that so much, right? To be able that it's much more outcome oriented, because your whats are very clear objectives versus being here every day, but also how are those being measured, right? So that will be one thing that's been shifted. Yeah.
Andy, would you like to add to that? I think earlier we had a bit of a discussion on how.
Yeah, you were talking about employee metrics. Of course, as an organization, you would also see whether you're making any progress. And in the end, it's about business results, right? And the lucky thing is that there's a lot of research out there that really employee engagement is one of the leading indicators for business results. I mean, we don't want to just look at an isolated employee engagement score. That's not really very meaningful. It's about, are we getting better than yesterday? So it's about measuring this on a continuous basis over there, because when the employee engagement score is trending upwards over time, you can expect a few quarters afterwards better business results, because simply the people are more engaged at work. And the opposite is also true. If your employee engagement score is dropping, then you must be prepared for worse business results in the end. So it's a beautiful leading indicator that we have in our arsenal of KPIs. Unfortunately, we are not measuring it as frequently as, for example, our monthly P&L. I mean, nobody can imagine to run a company with a P&L which comes out once a year, right? But for employee engagement, often we do that. We only measure it once a year. And then we are wondering why we are not really making a dent and not really improving over there. There's simply not enough data points in order to do anything meaningful with that.
That's a really good point. I didn't think of it that way at all, Andy. Thank you. Marc, would you like to add?
Sure. I mean, I think with the employee engagement scores, as you've said, it's kind of once a year. You haven't really got your finger on the pulse of the team or the individual. You may have your finger on the pulse of the organization, which beats once per year, which doesn't sound like it's alive. I think it's really up to managers to manage their teams on a regular basis. And what we need to get higher employee engagement scores is to have better managers managing their people in a more interactive, more personable way. And for that, we need to train managers.
Yes. Anybody from the audience? Yes.
Hello. Hi. So what's your opinion, question for anyone, what's your opinion on the effects of hybrid working or working from home on employees' sort of connection to the brand of the larger organization? And if you think that that is the case, what can companies do to get around that?
Sherwin, would you like to take that?
Yeah, I can. That's great. Sorry, your name was? Amphita. Yeah, that's nice to meet you. That's a lovely question, right? So I think we have to move from culture being physical experiences versus an actual relationship and work experience, right? So if you think about the brand, so example, I work for Prudential. It's great. And we embrace hybrid and flexibility all the time. I had a team call the other day while I was having acupuncture treatment. So I'm because I have needles sticking out of me, and I think there's something poetic in that. And I was on a call, right? And I'm able to build in things. I'm being able to build health, wellness, and stuff. And that whole experience, when I have a call, we are always focused on: are we running inclusive meetings that support our ambition? That when we end the call, we are saying like, what's the takeaway from this call, and everybody shares and stuff, which is kind of like our curious value bringing to life, right? So there's a number of things like this which I wouldn't be experiencing in another organization. I wouldn't be able to do that. And to Andy's point before we started was that culture is a really differentiating factor for companies, right? So if you're able to ensure that even the remote experience and the hybrid experience is unique to you and is being able to better meet your employees' needs and yet have a commonality theme, right? So we do these emotional check-ins. We say, what's your learning? What's your thing? What do we do? Why we do a pre-mortem? You know, there's a number of things that we do which might not be so usual. And then that's kind of like how you be like, oh, this is what it means for me to be, for the employee, this is what it means for me to be working for an organization in this time that takes care of my needs, right? So and you have to find it for yourself because all employee populations are different, right? For different contexts and different things, and certain things might work differently, right? So that would be my response.
Okay. Any other questions on the floor? Oh, yes.
Maybe I would like to take a shot at this as well.
Of course, please.
Because you're putting really the finger in the wound. And I also see a lot of downside to all this kind of work from anywhere and nobody's coming back to the office. Because in the end, we also touched on it, we are losing social capital there. And a lot of companies are differentiating themselves because of a strong social capital. And as an individual, I mean, what are we all striving for in the end? It's a sense of belonging, right? So if I'm suddenly now isolated working there alone, I might be okay with this as an introvert for a while. But then for an extrovert, I think it was excruciating pain the last 12 months to just work by themselves. And then, of course, over time, it's a challenge for your organization to rope that back in because you have to look also in the long run. There might be then this effect, only people who come back to the office are visible to the bosses, and then they get promoted faster than others, the quiet ones over there. So the company has to proactively do something in order to level the playing field again for the people who are not coming to the office so often. So it's a lot of effort in order to avoid this, that people lose psychological safety, that they feel emotionally disconnected from the organization. It's not easy.
So I'd like to sort of build up on that as well, because I think it goes back to the behaviors. The corporate culture is to some extent defined by the CEO and the management, the leadership, and it kind of cascades down. And to Sherwin's point made somewhat earlier, is there's an echo that comes back from the people in the organization. And I think what builds up the concept of the organizational culture is that the song from on high, from the leadership, and the echo that comes back from the staff. And if you want to have a good song, if you want to sing in harmony, it's back to that. Those managers, those leaders, they need to be trained. They need to know how the effect that they have by saying the wrong thing, or by not reaching out, or by not communicating, what's the effect, or what's the effect they're not having on their corporate culture. So one can talk a lot about the physical workplace and the brand, the decoration, the colors, the fabrics, and all that stuff. It plays a part. It gives it a tangible quality. Yeah. But culture is fundamentally less tangible, and it comes through those behaviors and through the leadership, I think.
Yeah, I'll add two things. We'll come to your question in a while. But I think there is that individual basis. And you remember what I shared in our hybrid working approach, we actually have a position that we need to be able to engage twice a week, face to face, right? Specifically for that issue, right? Because you lose connection with people, you lose friends and things, right? So that's one. Two, I think I really like Marc's point, because I think managers, the call to managers have really to be able to be very inclusive in your style, in your practice, in your leadership. Right, so the antidote to being distance, right, is to be inclusive. And when we say inclusive, and that's very inclusive and belonging, that's a massive piece. And you mentioned belonging, the piece is that you want to be as inclusive as possible for all the biases that you might have, right? And what's popular in the market is gender biases and all these biases, which are very true. But with remote working and hybrid working, actually there's a bias we need to be really conscious of, which is distance bias, right? I tend to think more of people who are near to me versus people who are far away from me. How many of you have been in a hybrid call where there's some people in the room and some people are online, and the conversation is dominated by the people in the room, right? So actually the chair of the meeting and the leader meeting needs to understand that there's some people who have that distance bias is natural, and you might apply to that. And how do we be inclusive of that to be able to take more attention? What do you guys think? What do you have things? And to not just have a side chat, or we were just talking about, you have to have those behaviors to think. So I highly echo that. If that answered your question. Fantastic.
Can we have your question now?
Hi guys, I wanted to talk about, there's a lot of information about, or we've spoken about mental health, but what about the physical health? How do you ensure that employees are taking care of themselves when they are at home and not, say, sitting on the couch doing the laptop? Like, I mean, it's comfortable, but maybe in 6 months to a year time, it mightn't work out. So how do you ensure that employees are keeping healthy in that regards?
You guys, I have a response, but what did you guys get?
That is your domain or not? Physical workplace?
Yes, I suppose it is in my domain. I mean, let me put a slightly different spin on that. So how does one assure that even in a non-hybrid workplace, that when you get people coming into the office, if they choose to sit on a chair, when they have a choice of an ergonomic chair, let's use that simple example there, ergonomic chair. How can we encourage them to sit there and not to sit on a seat that looks like this one, which is very uncomfortable, by the way, after an hour and a half here. I need to stand up and move. We can't do that. It's really, at some point, again, you have to get people to learn to be, to take responsibility for themselves. But to one of your 4 points of enabling people to do it is you've got to remove the barriers. So if the barrier is that, well, I haven't got an ergonomic seat at home, or I can't afford it, or whatever, then is there a channel there to take that particular element of the crisis and turn it upside down and say it's an opportunity for us to give you or provide for you or some other way give you an ergonomic workstation? If it's about physical exercise, getting up and exercising, nobody's going to get me to do that. So I don't know.
I read about one example from a company in the US where basically it started and then everybody had a Zoom session over there, and as icebreakers, and they said, please show us your home. So that they were encouraged to walk with a laptop around and show the home. And then there was a very observant manager, and then he observed what is the environment over there. And then he looked, oh, they're sitting at a kitchen table. They have just a normal wooden chair over there. And then he really sent them a check and said, yeah, $200, buy yourself some ergonomic chair.
Yeah.
So there's a very nice human touch. It was certainly not expected by the people. Doesn't cost the company a lot of things, but it makes a huge difference to the employee if they get appreciated in that way.
It's also a symbol of that the culture, to the earlier point, if it's showing that the organization cares.
So I'm not sure if I have answers, but I can share what we're trying to do. Okay. So I think in the world of like making sure that they have a proper setup, in the beginning, one of our big responses was, okay, everybody has to work from home, not everybody has equipment. How do we send them monitors, chairs that we will be in the office to their homes to be able to have a big screen and to have at least as ergonomic as you would have been in the office, right? So that's from ergonomic space. I think in terms of our, let's say our sports and rec club, SRC, when we pivoted, it was called DOSCON Orange, for those of you who remember. So we had a Project Orange to like, how do we help people have some sort of level of things? So we had yoga online, virtual classes, and all that sort of stuff. We introduced meditation online, which was actually pretty popular and had more engagement than we have. So that's from a company providing type perspective. Even EAP is changing, right? So if you think about the employee assistance program of companies, quite often they're like the in-house company emergency hotline, right? But we're actually shifting that. We're shifting that instead of just like when you're in trouble, when you're in mental distress, call this number. How do we keep you out of being in mental distress, right? So now we are changing our EAP to be able to offer life coaching, have to be able to have progress, how do you have to have wellness. We have an app that has meditation and stuff and all that stuff, right? So that's the mental wellness bit. From the physical health, then it has to be a conversation expectation. Right, so we're an insurance company where we say our purpose is to have people get the most out of life. So actually, our Prudential Pulse app, you can check your age, or you can take your photo and it'll tell you like how old you are. As for your photo, not into a chronographic age, you have your web doctor, you have things, but there's this whole theme of being able to engage around what health means, what package means, and to be able to do that. When circuit breaker hit, there was not much to do, so I self-practice. I lost 24 kilos, so I was a lot bigger then. And then after that, I put on 12. So the whole year I was net 12 down. And then this year I lost 7, right? But I think that whole rhythm to be able to balance things, and what happened for me personally, and I encourage my whole team to do it, is to start to have walking meetings, because if you remember circuit breaker, the only time you could go out is for groceries or for walk. Right. So then what I would do is that I would schedule calls that I didn't need the screen with to have a walk. And actually it was funny because my goal was like 5Ks. And then after I finished 5Ks, the call hadn't ended yet. So I just continued walking until the call ends. And then that got me into the thing. And so you have to find the rhythm for your health and wellness to be able to do that. But I highly believe in work-life harmony, you mentioned, or work-life integration. Right? How do you, it's not mutually exclusive. What are the opportunities where you could leverage each other for that, right? So, and then you have team walking meetings, even though everybody's on the call is walking and things like that, right? So I would encourage people to be flexible and to think out of the box for the base need.
I think that there's, I think organizations do have a responsibility to their people when they are working in a hybrid way, especially if, we're seeing so many organizations cutting their footprint and therefore cutting their rent, their operating costs, saving enormous amounts of money by allowing or engaging or permitting or facilitating hybrid work. What I'm seeing something of, but maybe not enough of, is how those organizations are now helping their people to get a good home office setup. And we recognize that some people don't have the space or they don't have the circumstances to do that. But I would quite like to see organizations increasingly have an ergonomist who would make themselves available to visit people at home and come up with a menu of ideas that they could do, either from improvising stuff at home, which might be as simple as stacking some books up on a table so you can have a standing workstation, very cheap and simple, or take it up to various levels of degree, and to comment on the adverse health impacts of working in the way that they currently are on a day-to-day basis. Of course, there are questions of privacy and intrusiveness and all that. So it's got to be elective, but I'd like to see more of that happening.
Okay, we actually have a question online, and this is to Marc. How do you handle a team who is resistant to change?
Fire. That's for you, Marc.
Well, it's kind of tell them again. It's why is it? And it is a bit of, if there is, okay, we'll start with why is the change actually happening? And that is the fundamental reason. The why has to be communicated. It has to be communicated from the absolute top in order to get back to that cycle of understanding, acceptance, and then ultimately buy-in. And you don't necessarily get to buy-in until very, very late in the stage when people actually see it. Trust me, it'll be fine. Is not going to get you buy-in. Yeah. They have to see it to believe it. So it is very strong communication from the top, very strong behavioral demonstration of how it's going to work, how we the leadership top down are also affected. So you can't expect the leadership to expect their staff to change without they themselves demonstrating that they are also affected by the change and embracing it, whether they like it or not, because it's for the greater good of the organization. And we're talking about organizational change here. So that's being done for the purpose of the organization, for its commercial success. It's not a democracy, it's a commercial proposition. Ultimately, communicate, engage. You're never going to get 100% buy-in. You're going to try and shift the double negatives into the sort of negative zone and the negatives into the slightly positive zone, and the positives, great if you can push them over the double positive zone. If you are engaging with the staff, and back to that point, the people on the front line, if they're resisting it, why are they resisting it? Yeah. Is there a strong reason? And sometimes if it's personal and selfish and well, because I don't want to change, that can happen. But if it's, again, treating people as adults, mature professionals, then listen to them. And they may be saying, this is not just in my own interest. Yes, it is as well, but it's also in the commercial interest as well. I've actually got my professional interest as part of this organization at heart. So it's listening, it's communicating, and it's dialogue. I think that's how I tackle it.
I think that's very well answered. Would anybody else like to add to that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, example from what our clients have been doing on our platform. Then when they had some change, of course, it's not everyone like a big wave, right? It starts with some trickle, and then leadership really looked for examples where employees embraced the change, and then made a small story out of this one and shared this story on this social media platform in-house, so that people could visualize it a little bit more. What does it mean? And the people who change should be on the peer-to-peer level, right? So it's not the boss who say, I changed and here's how it is. No, it should be someone on the peer-to-peer level where the others can relate to. And then if you visualize it, even maybe a small video clip, a few photos inside, make it approachable, make it social over there. So a lot of people realize, oh, that's what you mean with a change. Because sometimes when you just verbally explain it, people cannot picture it properly. Mm-hmm. So we have to take advantage of all the media that we have over there in order to make it a little bit more approachable for the people.
Okay. Do we have another question from the floor? Okay. Oh, yes, over there.
Hi, everyone. Suman here from Prudential. So my question is to Marc or anyone else who would like to answer. So with organizations at this point, it's a bit easier when you talk about real estate and giving up space because it's a huge cost savings. So they are supportive of the change. We don't know where we would be in 6-12 months, right? Should there be a case whereby this doesn't work for the organization, it doesn't suit the organization culture, and people have given up space? How then does the workplace evolve, and what does that mean in terms of culture and the resistance from the organization itself to go back to taking on additional space?
That's a really good question. So I've been talking to a number of organizations around the region about this exact same question. So there's a couple of answers to that. It's not a clear-cut answer because we don't know what the future looks like yet. On the one hand, there's a very pragmatic, what's the physical workplace strategy going to be, and to what extent are we allowing it to flex? So do we plan it so that, like a pair of trousers, have I got space to grow just in case? Or am I tightening the elastic so hard that there's no room to grow? And I think that's the first practical level to do it, to make sure that there's enough space. And you can plan your workspace accordingly in that way. And that's still tricky because it's never perfect, but at least it's an informed decision. The more challenging aspect is the cultural change piece. Now, I actually don't think that organizations, once they've started changing, they don't go backwards. They're on the path. Now, they might not get to where we thought they were going to get to go. They might get halfway there or quarter, but they're on that journey already. What I've also observed in organizations that have made changes is they've aimed for that and they've thought, well, what if it falls short? Let's just kind of plan accordingly. What I've often found in past examples is they've aimed for that, and actually you give an inch, they take a mile. They actually go beyond. So you introduce, let's again bring it back to sharing ratios and numbers and then something very pragmatic. You say, let's introduce a sharing ratio of 1 to 1.2. 120 people can share 100 desks. The other people, you can have more flexibility to work remotely or what have you. People take that and go, oh, this is okay, this works. You remeasure it, say 6 months, 12 months after it's been done, and you'll find that the actual sharing ratio is now more like 1 to 1.3, 1 to 1.4. So the next iteration will be designed accordingly. And once again, you'll find another leapfrog happening. You can only measure what's there today. You can't measure what's in the future. So I don't actually think it happens, but leadership can be quite nervous about that. Obviously, they'll plan for that. So they might plan those trousers to be that bit baggier than they need to be. That gives them that sense of comfort. So the response then is, well, plan to be able to tighten your trousers quickly. In other words, put into your leasing conditions something like an option to either withdraw early or to take an additional chunk at some point should you need it, and kind of build some safety mechanism into that.
Okay, we have quite a few questions on metrics actually coming in from our virtual viewers. The next one is, has there been a difference in performance metrics for employees that are onboarded remotely? Sherwin?
Firstly, I want to say that I feel for everybody who was onboarded in the remote times. It's a completely different experience to, I was onboarded physically, I know people, I know things, and now we're in virtual, right? So I really feel for them. I think the expectation of the role hasn't changed, and therefore the metrics of output hasn't changed, right? But the metrics of maybe, or the delivery of the onboarding has of course, the mechanism has changed, right? So for virtual, before you need a much more organized SharePoint or files before compared to before, right? Because you can't just point things out, right? You need to be a lot more organized. So I think the process of onboarding has changed, but I would say that the metric, have I changed the metric for, hey, you were onboarded during the pandemic and you were onboarded before the pandemic, and today you have two different metrics as a performance? We haven't done that.
Okay.
And I'm thinking with the premise of the question, right? I don't think that it also should. The premise of it is that, is the person who onboarded in the remote setting, are they disadvantaged versus this other person, and therefore the metric should fulfill that? I think a company, and certainly we do, challenge ourselves at how do we make sure that the remote person or the person onboarded in remote time is able to be supported and comes up to what is expected of the role versus having two class of citizens, if you will. That wouldn't sit with our culture.
Okay.
For sure.
Anybody would like to add?
I'm just wondering if, I would have the same question. I think it's a great question.
Yeah.
How does, let's take a hypothetical fresh graduate who's just been onboarded into a corporate. How long did that fresh graduate take to become a contributing member of the organization in a pre-COVID regular come to the office 5 days a week scenario? And how long does it take that same fresh graduate to acculturate and become a productive member of the team in the current environment? I don't know what the answer is. I suspect it's a lot longer, but I don't know. Anybody, do we have any fresh graduates in the room here? Put your hand up. Oh, we have a fresh graduate. Can you answer that question? Do you have a sense?
I suppose there's like different ways you can look at it, because if you want to immerse yourself in the company culture, I think being there presently or being at the workspace is a good way of doing so. But online, you might not engage in the culture as well. You might not know what your superiors want from you. So there's that fine balance to like look at.
And how do you feel you've been acculturated into your organization?
Well,
What's worked?
I've been lucky. Well, lucky or not, it's up to your opinion. But since I started work, I've been coming in full time, 5 days a week. And in that sense, it's helped me acclimatize easier, to know what your bosses want from you. And I think in that sense, it's really helped me acclimatize a lot better overall. I can't give an answer for if I was working online or working from home. That's just my perspective.
Yeah. And it's going to be difficult to do that because you're going to have to take two different people who have been in both situations and compare and contrast. I think it's a challenge one.
Hello, Andrew here. I just have a question in terms of how do you see kind of remote work affecting loyalty to a company? Because I've seen people who have been onboarded fully virtual, and it seems like they move faster because they're just clicking on a different Zoom link. They don't have to change office. They don't have to change lockers. Literally, it's just the links change in their calendar. So I'm just wondering, have you seen signs of actually loyalty eroding and kind of that reflecting in the attrition rates? Or do you anticipate that kind of changing once we go back to normal?
You want to take that?
Yeah.
Because you have more data, I guess, but I can take that from my
Go ahead.
The answer is we haven't seen a significant rate. So if we obviously measure attrition rates and things and regrettable attritions as a subset, we haven't noticed that in particular, right? That people who are onboarded, of course, it's relatively recent and the job market's not great. So there are some extenuating circumstances that might be suppressing attrition rates. But I think the premise of it is kind of like back to, was it Anupata's question, which is, are you able to give a good experience in remote? Are you able to form the connection to your company and your brand and your culture? And that has this impact on retention, which is kind of like the issue that you're facing. And I think companies who are able to do that, and our experience is that we are quite specific on that. We so far haven't seen it, but we are very intentional. Yeah. So I give you an example. Many of you might be familiar with the SG United traineeship, right, which the government came up with, and to support fresh grads, and we were in the papers recently for supporting, and we took in a batch, and we have equal numbers of fresh grads and also mid-career switches, right? And we came in, and they are coming on board in a pandemic for sure. And so what we did, we looked at it, and they are across the whole organization, and maybe not everybody, we actually tried to support them also as a cohort, right? Like you do a MA cohort or intern cohort. So there's a program to say that, okay, you guys come in, you're with your managers, but there is intentional check-in from a organizational level on like a monthly SG United, how's it going, what's your experience, how has it been? And we do have, coming back to both their points earlier, we do have a pulse survey. We use a certain platform that we then pulse to check in, how's your well-being, how you think, and then we're able to then have a hot heat map of the organization and narrow down into things, right? So it has to be that level of intention of making sure that whoever's onboarded, remotely or not, to be part of the team, to be a contributor in the team, but that we really care for you, right? If you don't feel the care, then sure, there's no loyalty, which is to your question. Right. So if we are able to do that both from a manager level, but a systemic ways at an organization and intention, then that's how we're approaching it. Is it really successful? I would say that the data is not available yet because it's so new. Right. So but we'll see. But that's just to share our approach.
I think there's a really good point there, though, is it brings us back to that culture. Care equals culture, engagement equals culture, good managers equal culture, and culture is a differentiator, which is the point we were making earlier. It shows how important culture and nurturing, looking after your culture, how important that is in this new world that we're in. It may have been a second thought, it may have happened naturally before. Now it's something we really need to look after.
Intentional. It has to be a lot more intentional at this point. Yes. Okay, we have time for one more question. Yes.
Hi, it's Vivek here from Singtel. So, I mean, I know a lot of people are calling it, office has been disrupted, but I really call it an accelerator. The crisis has been an accelerator of, the technology was lagging behind. But do you think industry is well prepared to take the leap into the next stage of technology, or will it take another crisis to come through, and then then industry moves into the next phase of sort of a more collaborative work? And the reason I'm bringing this up is because I was reading this research by an INSEAD professor. The whole our mind is not able to focus on Zoom because we are looking at a 2D image and we cannot read the body language of the people on the other side. So that really, brings into picture, are we lagging behind in terms of artificial reality?
Yep.
Do we need that to bring into industry, bring into workplace? So my question really is, are we really prepared for that next leap? Or is it going to be another crisis that will, push to that extent?
Maybe I'll direct this question to Andy.
It's a good question. I don't think we are prepared for this one, because at the moment, a lot of companies are still struggling to catch up with the status quo. I don't know whether people are thinking way ahead what could happen next over there. But the point that you are mentioning, I think we all feel it, right? We all don't feel that Zoom meetings are as effective as in-person, face-to-face meetings over there. So there's something lacking over there, which is creating gaps, and this has to be addressed. And current technology can only close some of the gaps, but not all of it.
Anybody else like that?
I think the technology is not lagging behind as far as we think it is. I think what's lagging behind is our behaviors, our own ability to deal with the change. I think, or to deal with the technology for that matter. I'm not saying the technology is perfect, not by a long shot, but our ability to sit there and go, like, I'm in a Zoom meeting, let me concentrate. That's what I'm finding incredibly difficult. It's like, oh, I've got 3 screens up and I'm listening to the Zoom meeting there. Oh, I just received an email. Let me cope with that. Hang on, what did he just say? And suddenly it's a kind of an internal thing. And one can get very quickly overwhelmed by saying, well, if I concentrate on this, I'll miss out on emails. And so we are getting overloaded. We're losing the ability to kind of manage our own. Well, I don't know about anybody else. Yeah. But I think I think the problem is with us. So we need to either train ourselves or be trained. We need to learn a whole new skill set. We've only had to do this for the last 12 months, and that's not a long time. And if you've been working in the industry for 25, 30 years, making that change is that much harder. Someone introduces Teams, and I don't know, did you send me a Teams message or an email message? Where do I find the blasted file? It's driving me nuts, okay? And it's a new set of skills. That is maybe where the technology is lagging, but it's a combination of things. I don't know. Yeah.
It's funny because I'm thinking of the premise of the question, right, Vivek? And and what it's coming up with is like there's a fundamental gap in terms of how ready we are as human beings working and the available technologies, which is and I agree with Marc. A lot of it has to do with human psychology and how we respond and how we build a team. I contrast this to maybe younger. So I have a 9-year-old daughter, and she has they had home-based learning and their Zoom calls and stuff. And there's less resistance because there's less built-in things. I mean, I don't want to be a teacher teaching 20 kids on Zoom, right? But it is this mayhem. But somehow they're able to navigate it and they're able to do it, right? So is that a level of understanding? Yes. And is it an understanding at the end to be able to do it? Zoom fatigue is a real thing, right? And do we then recognize that as a way of working that buffers that within short breaks in between rather than back to back the whole day? Are we able to make sure that a Zoom meeting has a lot more emotional rapport building connections in the beginning before you go into the work task? There's a number of things that I think that is human behavior and work practice and cultural practices, and I say work culture in that sense, that can be balanced, right? So I don't think it's a pure technology piece, but can technology be harnessed to give nudges? Can technology be able to do these things? Right now in Prudential, if I set a 1 hour meeting, I get a pop-up in Outlook to say that, hey, meeting should be 45 minutes to give you a buffer, la, la, la. You know, so all these kind of things, you could harness existing technologies if we understand how people work, right? So I think leaders in organizations have to be much more clearer on the human psychology, human dimension. I say I'm a certified hypnotherapist, and I tell you, when I did it, it was a side thing. I never thought that some of the principles that I learned there would be applicable at work, but understanding unconsciousness, I understand how that works, and the subconscious works actually is tremendously important as a leader today in this world, right? So I don't think it's a pure technology piece, if I could share.
Okay, and that's all we have time for. I want to thank the three of you as very, very experienced speakers for spending your evening with us today. I think we delved into a lot of topics today about leadership, trust, rigorous communication that has to be done across the companies and throughout the companies. We've also touched on a little bit about technology as well. So I really hope that this session was as enriching and meaningful to you as it was for me. Let me hand over this time to Valentina.
Thank you very much, Angelina. And dear speakers, thank you so much for your very valuable insights. Thank you also to you for coming in today, and those online. Thank you so much.